21mm socket, remove all 6 of your lug nuts, and then take the wheel off. Next, you want to take this sway bar link off. It's going to make things a lot easier. 18mm nut. Usually if it doesn't come out like that, because this one's new, it did, you want to grab on right here with some locking pliers and hold it so that the whole thing doesn't spin. Now you can set this off to the side, and we'll move on to removing this cotter pin. Straighten it out, and now with a 19mm socket, remove this nut. All right. As you can see, before I fully removed it, my ball joint popped out of the knuckle. That doesn't always happen, so if it does, remove the nut completely, thread it back on a few threads, and then you want to take a hammer. You want to take a hammer and hit right here until this pops free. That should do the trick. Now with the 21mm, remove this nut. Yours might be a 19. This is not the original tie rod. And now to get this to break free from here, don't hammer on the stud because that'll ruin the threads. Hammer on the knuckle right here. And most of the time that'll break it free. I'm going to put the nut back on just so I don't confuse it with a different one. The next thing I want to do is remove this cap here. Someone's already removed this and it's indented. Usually what you have to do is take a little hammer and a screwdriver or pry bar, hammer it in right here behind this lip so you can pry the cap off. And just go around. There we go. That should come off. There's a large cotter pin in here that you have to remove. Take that off, and then there's a little securing cap for the axle nut. And the axle nut is a 36mm nut, so remove that. All right. Now the next step you want to make sure of is that the axle actually pushes in and moves. If it doesn't come out and it's stuck in here, you want to take a punch and a hammer and punch right in there. You don't want to hammer on the edge of the axle here on the threads because you'll damage the threads. There we go. That's exactly what I want. Now that this is moving, what I can do is come back up here. Right under here, there's a clip for the ABS wire. You want to pop that out and then unbolt it from up here with a 10mm socket. One more place I'm going to unbolt it from is at the top here. You don't absolutely have to, but it will make things easier. It's going to give the wire a lot more slack when you go to separate the upper control arm from the knuckle. Okay, take this off, and that's a lot more than you probably need, but you're better off having extra slack than not enough. And at this point, you can grab a pry bar, carefully pry down on this upper control arm, remove the nut, release the upper control arm, and then as the knuckle comes down, you want to make sure you pull the axle out of the hub and the bearing. That way it doesn't get stretched. And you can leave this just like this. Now we can get to removing this upper ball joint. So right in here, you see there's a snap ring. And with some snap ring pliers, I want to remove this from here. Perfect. All right, and it came off with the boot, which is totally fine. Take all that off. I'm just going to wipe off the grease here. That way, when I take it out, it doesn't get in the way of my tool or anything. I want to set it up with a cup up here so that it presses the ball joint up and out because it comes out that way. The problem is I don't want to press on the stud because it's way too floppy for me to actually press on it and ensure that it stays straight. So I'm going to cut it flush up there. That's exactly what I wanted. Now I'm going to set up the ball joint press to press flat onto this piece that I cut off. it's going to be a lot easier to press onto that than onto a stud that's continuously wiggling back and forth. My cup moved. You want to make sure that it leaves room for the ball joint to go up. And keep in mind that this control arm is angled backwards a little bit, so make sure you follow that angle when you install the ball joint press. The ball joint ball pressed up and through, so that's not good. So I'll remove my tool from here. So what I have to do now is get another one of these plates and basically make sure that the ball joint press presses on the outer ring. Okay, so I have this little adapter on the bottom. That's going to help me press on the outer ring of the ball joint. Now I'm going to get my air gun in here and hopefully tighten it up and press the ball joint up and out. As you can see, this is not coming off. It's super rusted in there. I'm going to try and heat it up a little bit. Hopefully that'll help break it free. I have a little bit of pressure on this. I didn't put a lot of force because I don't want it to all of a sudden pop and basically explode in here in my face as I'm trying to heat this up. But heat hopefully should break this free from the control arm. Keep in mind you want to heat up the control arm, not the ball joint, because as metal gets hot, it expands, and you want the control arm to expand around the ball joint, not the ball joint into the control arm. Okay, let's see what this does. Oh yeah, it's moving now. There we go. Okay, now this is going to be very hot. This is not hot, but the ball joint is hot. So there's your old ball joint. Before I install this upper ball joint, I want to take the boot off because as it goes through the hole in the control arm, there's a pretty high chance that this boot is going to get pinched or crushed in there and ripped, and obviously that's no good. So with a pick, I'm going to gently remove this ring that locks it in. It's a lot easier to remove it than it is to install it. And then also gently, I'm going to go around, break the boot free off the ball joint, and then pull it down. If for some reason you wanted to add extra grease, this would be the time. Now with my boot off the ball joint, I can put it through the hole. If you need to clean off any rust, go ahead. I already did. And then I have this little flat cup that I'm going to put up here. You don't want to press. Show it. You don't want to press on the top of the ball joint because, well, as you saw when I took the old one out, this has the ball inside right here, so it'll damage it if you do. So you want to press on the outer ring, and this cup fits perfectly. Then on the bottom, I have this tool here, which I want it to be long enough to have room for the stud to go down. And I'm going to put my ball joint press up like this, start it on. And now as I tighten this through this little window, you'll see the ball joint get pressed down. Okay, I think that bottomed out. So let's back it off and check. Perfect. Let's check the top. Yep, if you look at the top right here, it's bottomed out all the way up against the control arm. That's exactly what you want. And another way to check it is this groove right there. This is for the snap ring, so if you cannot see this groove, it is not fully installed. You need to keep going until you see the groove. Speaking of snap ring, let's get the new snap ring in. Typically, you do not want to reuse them. So I'll get this new one up on here. There we go, just guide it up into place and make sure it's seated all the way around, which it is. Perfect. Now let's get the boot on. Now the way I like to do this is start it on one end, hold it on, grab your pick, and basically just guide it up and around the rest of the way. Awesome. Give it a couple twists to make sure that it's seated everywhere. You don't want this to fall off. And that's it. Upper ball joint installed. So with a pry bar, I'm going to pry down on this upper control arm, start the ball joint in. There we go. Start the nut on, and now let's bottom it out and torque it. The new nut is a 21 millimeter. Go ahead and bottom this out. And now we'll torque it. The torque for this is 81 foot-pounds. Perfect. All right, so that's 81 foot-pounds. For me, the castle nut slot with the hole happens to line up perfectly, which doesn't always happen. If for you it doesn't, you want to keep tightening this nut until you reach the next slot on the castle nut. You definitely don't want to loosen it to align it. Install your cotter pin and bend it over to lock it on. Next, I want to put the axle nut back on. Okay, let's go ahead and torque it. So I brought the vehicle down to the ground. I'm going to put a pry bar in between the lug studs here just to prevent the wheel from spinning. And now I'm going to torque this to 217 foot-pounds. Perfect, right there. Now I'll put on this locking cap and make sure that the slot in it lines up with the cotter pin hole. Right there. Slide your cotter pin through. All right. Make sure you bend it over, that way it locks itself into place. All right, and now you can take this cap, make sure it's seated all the way and secured. Now I'm going to reinstall the tie rod end, put the nut back on to bottom it out. Now let's torque it to 67 foot-pounds. Okay. Right there. I'm going to go a little bit more so that the cotter pin slot lines up. Perfect. All right, put your cotter pin back in. And lock it down. Now reinstall the sway bar link. Drive it through the knuckle. Okay, bottom this out. And now let's torque that to 52 foot-pounds. Perfect. Now reinstall this ABS wire, reinstall the top bracket first. I sprayed some anti-seize in the hole, that way it doesn't rust even more than it already did. Okay, make sure that's nice and tight. And then there's another one down here. Make that nice and snug. And then last thing is this clip. Make sure that clips in. And now let's get the wheel back on. Go ahead and reinstall the wheel. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and then torque them to 83 foot-pounds. .83 foot-pounds. All right.